Rohit, hi. Good to have you with us. How have you been?
Hi. Hi.
Rohit, I am, looking forward to this discussion, right? Given that, you've been in the edtech space, right, for a fairly long time, makes it a very interesting discussion, right? Because, there are there are not a lot of, founders that you kind of come across. I mean, when you talk of edtech, right, I think it's just become so much more exciting, right, in the last 1.5 years.
Yes, yes.
But I think there was a phase, right? So for example, 2000, 17, 18, for example, was a phase, right? 19 was a different phase. I think 2020 is a completely different phase. So I think we've seen cycles, very quick cycles within the tech space, right? And that's become very important, right? And I think anything that happened in a pre 2016 sort of an era, I think has had a very different kind of a run, right? And like I said, we education is something, or edtech is something that's gone through very, very quick cycles, right? And I think there have been some marquee players that have gotten built in the process. There's a lot of money which has been pumped in, but I think it all became overwhelming, right? And to an extent, an aberration, right? In what we saw
Yes.
in 2020, right? And I think more importantly, the consumer adoption has been absolutely phenomenal, right? I think it just puts the entire edtech space on an accelerator, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And how, right? And like I said, I'd love to discuss some of those things with you. It becomes an interesting conversation in that sense. But before we do that,
Looking
Rohit,
forward.
you know, before we do that, Rohit, I'd love to take me through your journey, right? I mean, you've been a founder, right? Like I said, you've been at it for a reasonable amount of time. So just take me through your journey, right? Of building
Yeah,
UFavor
sure,
and
sure.
before.
Yeah, would love to. Great. So it's been amazing journey so far. I
Sure.
passed out from IIT Bombay in 2004, and since then I worked in IBM for about a year. And
Right.
after that, I started my first company in 2006, which
Hmm.
was also into education. So I've been working in education since 2006
Right.
now, and it's been I mean, I have seen all phases of education: offline,
Right.
online, K-12, post K-12. So
Right.
all the entire progression of how education has evolved in the last 15 years, I've seen it very closely. The initial
Right.
part of my experience was more to work with schools, where how to enable the schools with technology, content, teacher training, um, and other curriculum services.
Hmm.
Then later on, started UFaber in 2014. Then started doing more B2C. Started working on higher education and
Right.
more online, hybrid. So, so yeah, as you rightly said, the market is booming. There are many players coming, a lot of money being pumped in, and the ecosystem is becoming better. So education is a big market, and there are so many things that we are yet to see. But my journey, if I'll put it across in one line, has been amazing in education. There are very few people who have worked for so long in education and still working. So uh, so good to be part of this
No, I
industry.
think I think I think 2020 has been a different time, right? And I think 2020 gives you a different kind of a motivation. And I think, like I said, right, I think education as a sector has just become, I think the consumer side adoption was under, always a question mark, right? And
Yeah.
I think it was a fragmented ecosystem, which was, essentially skewed towards a very physically uh, or a physical infrastructure driven play, right? And I think all stakeholders continued to not really think of an alternate possibility. I think there was very little and a small movement which was happening in a
Yes.
digital physical environment, right?
Yes.
I think kind of COVID, like I said, I think one industry which has stood out in this entire, the pandemic that we saw, right? Globally, I think has been education, right? While of
Yes.
course
Yes.
there's a pullback that is there from the players which have invested heavily in infrastructure, right? I mean, everybody wants kids to and people to come back to colleges and schools and so on and so forth, right? But I think this is here to stay, right? Hybrid is here to stay.
Yeah.
I think,
Yes.
which is an interesting constant, right? From now on. Uh,
Yes. Pandemic. Yeah.
Right. So, right, one thing that I want to understand, right, is that, typically, when you look at education at a distance, right? For example, if I'm to look at education, right, it just becomes, unless I look very, very closely, right, it becomes very difficult to really sort of understand the differentiation between what A is offering and what B is offering, right? I think that's one at a product level, right? But I think when you start looking at an aspirational level, I think there's a massive overlap, right? I think everybody wants to
Yeah.
do everything, right? I mean, we've had players, who've been billion-dollar, who achieved $1 billion plus of valuation, right, are not necessarily doing very heavy revenues. And I think just to sort of build into that play, right, so that they can continue to ask that valuation, right, or justify that valuation, right. I think they're kind of now looking at many newer opportunities, right, and they're looking at a lot of sets and subsets, right, and microsets, uh, very quickly, right. Given that they already have the technology infrastructure, what's your thought about it, right? I mean, at UFavor, how do you differentiate yourselves? In all of this noise, right? How do you differentiate yourself in the market?
So you're right. The many players which has come up, a lot of money has come into the market. But as we see, the market is huge. I think the still almost like 75-80% market is offline,
Right.
which is yet to shift online. So the people recently, pandemic has sort of given the required catalyst for things to move online. But still, there is a huge market to cover. And
Right.
Even the biggest companies do not have more than like 2, 3, 4% market share. If I consider the overall user base who can eventually pay for education, who are paying for education. So the ecosystem is building up, and there's a scope for there's a space for many new players who can become $1 billion companies.
Right.
As far as the differentiation here is concerned, there are 2, 3 different varieties of differentiation. One is primary differentiation is the pedagogy. How are we teaching? How, because there are many ways to teach online. There are many ways
Right.
to provide the same subject either in offline and online.
Right.
So one of the major differentiation is how we teach, which is where our hypothesis is that everybody wants a personal trainer. If there is an affordability there, and if you want to learn something today, you would want a personal trainer.
Right.
Okay, whatever you want to learn, but most of the time we don't get it, or we don't want it because it is not affordable, or it is available at a premium, which
Right.
is out of our pocket size.
Right.
So the primary offering that we are having is a personal teacher along with the video content and along with the assessment to see how the student is progressing. Now, the combination of these 3 things is what makes us unique in the market. Okay, there are very few players, especially the catalog that we have, which
Right.
is well diversified. We're one of the very few players who is diversified from like school to college to post-college, from like communication courses to exam prep and employability skills. So there's
Right.
a well diversified catalog here, along with the personal teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that gives us a very right positioning in the market where we are giving the required results also to the student,
Right.
and at the same time making it affordable also for them.
Very interesting. But Rohit, I'd love to understand a little more about it. Right? I mean, given that you're giving a one-on-one teacher, right? I mean, that's a very difficult environment to operate in, right? I mean, I think many people have tried that, and many people have actually, if not failed, right? I think kind of, uh, uh, you know, not
Moved,
taken that initiative.
shifted to something
Correct. They've
else.
shifted out of that. They've shifted out of that
Yeah,
environment, right? I mean, I would
yeah,
love to understand a little more about, right? I mean, how are you enabling this one-on-one interaction? That's number one. Number two, the other challenge that really comes into the game, right,
yeah.
is the challenge of building a large workforce, right? And I think that
Yes,
is a huge problem, right? How do you solve for
yes.
that?
So that is what is an interesting question, and that's what puts it on an edge compared to other people. Because as you said, a lot of people started this, but then shifted to something else,
Mhm.
mainly because those many teachers are not available. It is
Right,
very difficult to maintain the quality at that scale.
right,
Okay, and it looks like that it is not scalable. You can't
right,
become a big company providing this kind of
right,
offering.
right,
Okay, and this is what we realized back in 2016-17 when we started working on this pedagogy, and we saw that. Uh, Eventually 4 or 5 years down the line we will stuck with this problem, that where do we get
right,
teachers from,
right,
because most of the time when it comes to a workforce, people start poaching from here and there. If I
right,
need somebody, I'll poach from X company, from Y
right,
company, and then somebody else will poach from me.
right.
So that is why we started creating our own teacher factory.
Interesting.
Okay,
Right,
that we will not the way it has happened in other industries like Infosys did in IT, or Ola did in Ola Uber did in travel, or
right,
Urban Clap did in home services. So basically, you start working on supply side, because you know that you need thousands of teachers. The primary
right,
problem in education in general, even in offline, is also teacher. If you go to a school today and ask what is your biggest problem, they will say teachers. So,
right,
but and based on the experience that I've been working with, we see that though content is a problem, technology is a problem, assessment is a problem, but the
right,
core problem is teacher, because the student wants a teacher, and
right.
there is no ecosystem which is creating teachers.
Mhm.
Okay, that we have for all the other professionals, whether it is a software engineer, it's a lawyer, it's a CA,
Right,
it's a marketing guy. For everything, we have an ecosystem offline of a university or a college which is creating that professional people.
right.
But for teacher, there is none. While we need thousands and lakhs of teachers for the entire education to cover, but we don't have an ecosystem to do that, to cover
Right.
that. So that's where we realized that, and then we started working heavily on our teacher training programs.
Interesting. Okay.
So today, all our trainers, almost 3,000 plus teachers, come from that teacher training program.
Interesting.
Okay, so they have been trained on our content. They've been trained
Right.
on our ecosystems. They were not teacher earlier. These are mostly women working remotely from home. And there's a large workforce available like that. I mean, in India, women hardly work because of their location constraint, domestic constraint, and other variables.
Correct.
So we are basically empowering them. We are enabling them to become a teacher, give them the flexibility to teach from home, give them the content, give them the technology, and basically make them a part of this workforce. Now, with this kind of workforce, we do not see a scalability challenge. We see that we can have even 100,000 teachers working with us.
Right. Very interesting.
That is what puts up. That is what creates our inventory, and that is what gives us the confidence that we can scale in one-on-one also. Unlike others who have shifted because of the scalability issues or because of the affordability issues, that's where we have been able to maintain that pedagogy at this scale also.
Super. Rohit, typically, and I think before I ask my next question, right, I'd love to understand what's the split, right? So, for example, if you have 3,000, 4,000 teachers on your, as part of your cohort, right, for example, what percentage is women and what percentage is, for example, men?
99% are women.
Oh, that's brilliant. Right? I think you're doing exceptional work in that case, right? Because I personally believe and feel, right? I think that women empowerment is extremely critical, right? And I think education is something that naturally comes to them, and not because it's anything to do with the position, but I think the fact of the matter is that women bring in a very different kind of a patience, right? Men usually are not sensitive at that level, right? Might not necessarily have that required patience, right? Which is very critical as a foundational play in learning, right? So I think kudos to you and your team, right?
Thank you.
Right, typically what happens in an online environment, right? Something that I've continued to question with many people. I look at it, when my daughter, for example, is doing something online, right? I continue to sort of look at her, observe her. And the problem that I found out is that, when you're enabling that kind of interaction, right, you're not necessarily sure in terms of if the student is concentrating or not concentrating, right? You're not necessarily very clear in terms of, where does the student, at what level is that piece of content or is that teacher hitting him or her, right? In terms of understanding, right? And that often leads into very basic, miss, right? In the entire learning structure, right? In the framework that possibly in the mind, right? What's your sense of that, right? I mean, and of course, while we've been raving about online education, right? We've been raving about a lot of content which has been created, doing a lot of, for example, mentoring which is required, right? A lot of sessions, for example. But what of ensuring that the quality is extremely consistent, right? And students are kind of picking it up in the right way, right? Or is there a mechanics that you build saying that A teacher doesn't suit you, right? So possibly you shift to a teacher B, right? Is there certain mechanics that you build in the process which helps the students learn faster?
Yes. That's an interesting thing, and a lot of things that you mentioned are normally or in general taken care of in other pedagogy, which is one-on-one. So and the student is learning something or not, how are their expressions? Because one-on-one the teacher can focus, though it is online, still the teacher can focus and then understand what the student is understanding.
Right.
Okay, so one-on-one pedagogy takes care of a lot of things, a lot of problems that you mentioned in online learning, because the problem with the online learning is that everything to do on the computer is called online learning.
Right.
Whether they're playing game or whether they're watching video or they are giving a quiz or they're reading an article, everything is called online learning.
Right.
However, the efficiency or the interaction of each of these methodology and pedagogy is different.
Right.
So the moment we put one-on-one interaction, it takes care of a lot of inefficiencies of online learning. And second thing is the frequent assessment.
Right.
Okay, when you do the frequent assessment, the assessment need not be very competitive. It could be more formative assessment also. When you look at the recordings of the classes, when you do more report submissions and assignment submissions, there you get to know whether the student is progressing or not.
Interesting.
So in a personalized pedagogy which we follow, there are milestones for each student, and when the students are not achieving those milestones on time or they are lagging behind, then that becomes an indicator for us that there is a problem with the student, which could be with respect to the teacher, or which could be with respect to the content or the pace or the sequence of the resources or the content. So that is where it becomes an indicator that we need to do some change.
Interesting. Very nice. Rohit, distribution is very important, right? When you talk of anything to do with EdTech, right?
Yes.
There are people who've essentially been operating in a completely digital environment, right? Who've been acquiring a digital environment and fighting it out with extremely small conversions, right? And then of course there are people now who are experimenting with a hybrid environment of acquisition, right? In your case, while of course I understand that the delivery is distributed, right? And like you mentioned, right? You've created a certain factory, certain setting, right, where you have many tutors, right? Because that's a very critical piece in your entire
Yes.
scheme of things, right? Uh, how is the acquisition planned, right? How sharply is the acquisition plan? Is there also a hybrid environment that you have there on the acquisition side of things, or is this essentially happening in a digital environment?
The acquisition is completely digital so
Okay.
far, and so far we have not faced much problems with that.
Right.
However, when we scale in the future, we might need to go for hybrid and offline acquisition channels also, because as I said earlier, the primary market is offline. We have to shift a lot of offline guys to online.
Right.
Okay, so today, if we are doing on a run rate of about 100,000 students, and tomorrow, if you want to do say about 1 million student or a 2 million student, maybe 3 years, 5 years down the line,
Right.
then these students will be basically shifted from offline to online. Okay,
Interesting.
so that acquisition strategy will evolve with time, but so far it has been primarily digital. It's very simple. We have organic traffic on the websites. We have lead generation campaigns going around on all the advertising platforms. From there, we get a lead, and then they take a free demo class. So basically, the primary thing here, again, the differentiator here is in a lot of other courses and the players, you will not get a free demo class, free trial class.
Okay.
Okay, so that is where we offer here, and that gives a validation and an understanding of the overall offering to the student very well. Okay,
Right.
because without talking to someone, without actually taking a class, it is very difficult for a user to understand how is the course, how is that going to help.
Mhm.
Okay, the moment we offer that, a lot of 80% of the questions are sorted. Okay,
Right.
and you understand how this program is going to help you, and that helps you in acquiring that customer.
Very interesting. Uh, Rohit, I think I want to understand distribution at a slightly different level, right? I mean, I would like you to cut it for us, right? In terms of where how many students, for example, have you served, right? So the key matrices that are there for any business, right? How many students
Mhm.
have you served till date, right? And if you can actually put it in phases, right? For example, like I said right at the outset of our conversation, that 15, 16, for example, was a different phase, right? 17, 18 was a different phase, and I think 2020 has been completely different phase, right? So
Yes.
what's been the growth across these phases? That's number one. Number two, you are serving categories, right, which are essentially in the middle of from a phase one to a phase two, right, transitioning
Mhm.
categories, right? You're essentially
Mhm.
enabling a lot of that, right? How's
Mhm.
the market matured in that particular category, right? Aspirationally, because today, with education now kind of increasing, right, people aspire, or kids aspire to sort of enter many competitive I mean, they work to sort of go through a huge competitive play, right, to enter these courses, right, and possibilities, right? So tell me a little more about that. Right? What have been the matrices like? How has it evolved for you? And yeah, I think then we're gonna cover the other aspects, right? The future of you favor, right?
Yes.
I have a bunch of questions.
Sure. So far, if to give you a number, so far we have served almost about 100,000 paid students, 100,000 people who have taken our paid program, one of our paid programs. And in terms of the free students who have registered with us and taken some trial class with us, that is more than almost 2 million students who have interacted with us. Uh,
Right.
so out of these 100,000 paid students, the growth rate has been almost like 2x for last 4 years
Mhm.
since we started offering these courses. So
Right.
so almost 40% of these people we have covered in last 1 year, 2021, which is where there has been a substantial jump.
Right.
Okay, and remaining 60,000 students we had done in last 4 years.
Right.
So last 2021 was very big for us. I mean, the substantial jump, primarily
Right.
because of pandemic and because of a catalog getting matured, people
Right.
getting transition easier. So, and we have built the required capacity in terms of
Mhm.
our sales team, marketing team,
Right.
infrastructure team, delivery
Right.
team. So, but the growth even before that was good. It was almost 2x every year, but the base was low, so the number of people were less. But
Right.
last year, the growth has been really good in terms of total number of students,
Mhm.
and this has been continuing this year also. This year, I think we are estimating almost about like 80-90,000 students, paid student this year.
Right.
And in terms of the categorization, we have these 4-5 different categories. From the beginning itself, we have maintained a very unique, very even distribution of the categories.
Right.
Okay, so it's not like very skewed that one category is doing almost like 70% of the business. The other categories are just supplementing
Right.
that. We have
Right.
maintained a good even distribution because because we are not experimenting with that. We know that there is a market in that category. There's a good demand supply gap in that category,
Right.
and we have a good product offering in that.
Right.
Okay, so that is why we've entered in that category, and we know that we can grow it, we can scale it. So the adequate amount of bandwidth has been deployed on that, and which is helping us taking a market share in that category. So like for IELTS and English language exams, now we have a substantial market share. We're one of the largest company offering these exams trainings in India in the format that we have. So that way, I mean, we have almost hit that sweet spot of about 100,000 paid student, which is very satisfying for us.
Right. No, I'm sure that is the case with, I think, every founder, right? I mean, I think that's a large number, right? Not a lot of companies in the EdTech space can talk about it, right? And especially when you're bootstrapped, right? And I'm going to touch upon that bit in just I think in just a bit, right? But before I do that, right, Rohit, India is a very large market, right? And I think education is something that I think is a very critical piece, right, in the entire journey of an individual, right? And I think tier 2 and tier 3 have also sort of significantly, contributed to this entire case, right? How's the case been for you, right? So, for example, out of 100,000 that you've done across 4 categories that you mentioned, right? How do you see the participation across, tier 2 and tier 3 cities in the country, right? How significant has that been, right? And what's the kind of surge that you've seen? Is this an exceptional surge vis-a-vis what you see in urban markets? Because urban markets, of course, have more maturity, right? They have more understanding about these career options, right? That are going to lead into taking a certain test, or for example, a prep, right? How's the participation been for you favored across tier 2 and tier 3 cities in the country?
So there's one interesting insight we have here. Especially in education and especially in online education, we have not seen much difference between a metro and a tier 1 or a tier 1 and tier 2. Actually, a tier 1, tier 2 guy is also has a similar amount of access to the information and the awareness as a metro guy has when it comes to education. So there isn't much difference as we see in other industries, whether it is travel or e-commerce or entertainment and these categories. In education, we have not seen a huge difference. Okay. The people come from all part of the country. We have students coming from outside India also. But if I talk about the distribution, it is not that our substantial percentage is coming from one category of the cities. It is well distributed. We have, and it is proportionate to the population also, because as in India we know there's a substantial population in metros and top 10 cities that covers almost a substantial market. I mean, top 10 cities covers about 10 crore people, or more than that. Okay, and then rest top 100 cities would cover maybe about 10 crore people. Okay, so as we increase as we go down to the cities, the population is decreasing. So your first 10 cities will have 10 crore, next 100 cities will have 10 crore, probably next 1,000 cities will have 10 crore.
Right.
Okay, so 30 crore is covered in your first in 1,100 cities.
Right.
Okay, which pretty much covers the most of the paying market.
Right.
And in terms of the awareness and the knowledge of a student, we have seen that a tier 1 guy is also as aware as a metro guy or a tier 2 guy.
Right.
Okay, because their access to any online information app, access to YouTube, access to Quora, access to Google, in last 2-3 years, fortunately, has almost been even.
Right.
And most of the source of information, even for a metro guy, as we see that the metro guy is a little more aware, but what is the source of his information?
Right.
The source of information is internet only, which is available to a tier 1 and tier 2 guy also.
Right.
So we have seen, a lot of. We are surprised when a tier 1 guy or a tier 2 guy comes with a particular requirement or a particular mindset, and then we started mapping it, and we realized that there's not much difference.
Right. Interesting.
So that's one interesting insight. The second thing is obviously there is a certain distribution. Metro and tier 1 covers almost about 40-50% of our students.
Right.
And remaining 50% student comes from tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4.
Interesting. Rohit, it's interesting when you say that, right? Because as soon as you start talking to many EdTech founders, right? And I think not just EdTech, but I think in general, right? Is that tier 2 and So urban markets, tier one, tier two, is there's a complete split that you see, right? And that's largely, of course, awareness levels are there, right? And in fact, awareness levels have kind of increased, especially in the post-COVID environment, right?
Yes.
Because, like you said, right? I mean, everybody has access to YouTube. There's a lot of free content which is available. Uh, but I think the influence has kind of changed, right? I think there was always a question mark around the ability to pay, right? And given
Yes.
the low earning rates, for example, right? Be it an urban audience and a tier one or a tier two audience, right? A lot of that did not necessarily translate, right? That's number one. Number two, conversion became a problem. Second, trust on a touch and feel was something which was very critical. Uh, Third was, a deferred demand, right? So, for example, for somebody in an urban area, while he or she would try and consume it as the fastest, right? In a tier two or a tier three setting, right? What you would typically see is a deferred demand, right? So, they will continuously tend to push it, right? Till it gets to a certain point, it becomes almost necessary for them to consume it because that's like the last leg of uh, or the possibility that exists for them, right? Is that something that you're seeing, or is that something that you've seen across your conversion cycles as well, or not so much? You'd rather just sort of look at how is it converting and not necessarily dissecting into a lot of these nuances.
So we have a different insight and thesis on that, which we have got a good validation of. So when it comes to education, the behavior is very different in tier one, tier two, tier three.
Right.
Though they might look like a low-paying crowd or low-paying population, but when it comes to education, there is nothing like that.
Okay.
Okay, because those guys see it a more ROI than a metro guy.
Mhm.
Okay,
Interesting.
in metro, a student would probably might want to differ because he or she has not probably his parents or his surrounding has not get that kind of ROI by spending on education. But the guy who is in tier one, tier two has seen a huge ROI for the families who have spent on education.
Interesting.
Okay, so
That's very, it's a very
there
interesting
is
way
a
to look at
town.
it.
Yeah, so suppose there is a town from where a guy has done IIT and has grown in the
Right.
career and probably has gone out of the country also. Now,
Right.
in that town, there is a huge aspiration to spend on education.
Mhm.
Okay, so the guy will probably put his land on, get a loan against the land and will invest on education.
Right.
Okay, so we see a very different trend in education spending compared to any other spending, whether it is entertainment or electronics or apparel or travel. There,
Right.
the hypothesis is right that the tier one, tier two, tier three is the Bharat in India, and their paying capacities are less. So, how do you acquire them? How do you include them in your basket or in your TAM?
Mhm.
But in education, we don't see that kind of differentiation. We see that market converting better
Right.
and paying a premium. The only problem that we see there is the trust.
Mhm.
See, because those guys normally do not trust very easily.
Right.
Okay, so that is what is a problem you have to solve. If you're able to solve that problem, then paying capacity and urgency and the aspiration, this is not a problem. That is much better compared to a metro guy or a tier one guy, because there the guy is very clear. The only way for me to come out of this village is education.
Right. Very interesting. Right. No, I like the way you put it, Rohit. And I think honestly, that's not, I think we tend to get swayed when we start looking at numbers, right? We tend to get swayed by, what's visible, right? I think what you actually put is a very different perspective to this, right? And I think no, I think I kind of concur with what you're saying, right? I might have views on certain aspects, but I think I kind of largely agree with you that that's the only exit possibility, right? And I think that's essentially
Yes,
what we see across certain regions, right? For example,
yes,
Bihar is extremely aspirational when it comes to prep of civil, for example, right?
yes.
Other such exams, right? GATE, other such competitive exams, right? And I kind of agree with you, right? I think that's
And
that's
even just to add, even in offline, if you see
Sure.
offline coaching classes, which are like sort of hubs like Kota or Delhi or say
Right,
Hyderabad, where are the students coming to these classes from?
right,
Okay, all these classes are crowded or filled with the students coming from tier two and tier three towns only.
sure,
It's not that the metro guys are going to these classes.
right,
So all the big coaching classes or big institutes or big training institutes, they get a substantial share of their students from tier two and tier three towns only. Even in colleges as well, like big universities like Amity or say all these private universities. Where do they get their students from?
right. Interesting. Interesting. But I think no conversation in edtech can can be complete, right, without talking of COVID, right? Because it's been an unreal event, right? It's touched us at many levels, but I think it's
Yeah.
just changed everything beautifully for the edtech sector as a whole, right? I think it's just opened up. possibility and space for, I think, each player to fight it out and offer something, with little amount of exclusivity, right? But better quality, definitely, right? Because it's a very
Yes.
transparent mechanism of now kind of engagement, right? Uh, in the categories that you are offering, right? How has that, what's your view, right? I mean, how has COVID changed one, of course, the perception around this category, right? And because there is a lot of aspirational work that you're doing, right? For example, IELTS is something which is a lot to do with a very different kind of exposure, aspiration, right?
Mhm.
Uh, have the numbers gone up? What are you seeing, right? And how do you think that this is a trend which is going to continue for a much longer time, right? Because I mean, there's a huge debate going on in the tech sector right now that there is we start to see a lot of tracing back, right, to the normal, right? As soon as, say, larger population gets vaccinated, right, second dose of vaccination happens. There's a tentative third wave that we're talking about. But once I think these fears are kind of subside, right? We will possibly start going back to a pre 2027 era, right? And there's a huge discussion and talk around that, right? Nobody necessarily knows, uh,
Yeah.
but I think there is a certain sense of discomfort there. As when you start talking to founders, right? What's your sense of it, right? What is the kind of growth that you've seen in COVID, and do you think
So
this is specifically here to stay?
okay, so that's an interesting question. As you rightly mentioned, everybody is trying to figure out their bet on this. That what is going to happen post COVID, which we don't know whether there'll be any post COVID or not, because it might continue as it is. But yeah, so in general, we are very bullish, and we have seen very good growth in COVID. That's the positive side of it. People have changed their opinion about online. People are much easier to convince now to go for online. Uh, Whether it will sustain like this or not, our thesis there is that it will, because people who have taken online, it's not that they've not got the results, they've not got the benefits. They've seen the
Right.
benefits of it. They've seen how convenient, how flexible, how affordable, how effective it is. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, and those are the people who are becoming now the ambassador of the online method. So they are
Right.
going into education. Largely is a word of mouth industry. It's
Right.
unlike it's travel or e-commerce and these things. In education, people see for a while
Mhm.
that how it is playing out. It is,
Right.
you can't, no matter how much money in marketing, you can't polarize the consumer behavior.
Right.
And in education, anyway, that change of behavior, shift of behavior was due for a long time. I mean, it
Right.
was due for almost last 10 years.
Right.
Okay, ideally, education was the first industry to transfer online.
Mhm.
Okay, but it didn't happen. It happened for travel, it happened for e-commerce, it happened for other industries.
Right.
For education, it was due for a long,
Mhm.
which COVID sort of catalyzed that. It helped that in the transition. And now we think that it's not that the transition is complete. It's not that the all 80%, 90% people have transitioned. There's a
Right.
huge market still to be transitioned,
Mhm.
which will happen because the people who transition, who got benefit of it, they are going back and talking about it.
Right.
That I'm doing this, I'm learning this online. And the other guy is also seeing that I should also learn.
Right.
Okay. So that word of mouth is spreading, and that word of mouth is going to talk positive only about it.
Right.
As long as they've got the required benefit from that method. If they didn't get the required benefit, then obviously they're going to say that it is not working out, which is the case with the schools. Like
Right.
when the parents are talking about when the schools will open uh, for a physical location. Why? Because they're not seeing that much benefit in an offline class, in an
Right.
online class, when the school is
Mhm.
running online. When they're not seeing
Right.
ROI of their money, that why am I paying so much fee to teach online?
Right.
And
That's an
second,
interesting point. Yeah.
second, they're feeling that the child is not very comfortable in a 1 to 20, 1 to 30 kind of ratio when they're taking an online class. Teacher is not able to pay attention to each student, and
Right.
students are missing their offline activities and all those things. So that is where there is not much positive feel about a school to run online.
Mhm.
Okay, but when people are seeing the exam preparation courses or hobby courses or
Right.
certification courses or skill development courses, there they are seeing that the online is giving them better results, is giving them more convenience, are more affordable, the teacher
Right.
quality is better, the content is better. So there's a lot of positivity around that. So I
Right.
think since education is primarily a referral and word of mouth driven market, the online will grow for the sectors where the effects of online are positive.
Mhm.
For the sectors where the effects or impact of online is not very positive, it will probably either be stabilized at
Right.
the current level, or maybe have a dip also.
Interesting. Right. A very interesting question, right? I think what we've started to see, of course, there was a huge surge that we saw, right? as soon as COVID hit, right? I think the first 2.5 months, we could sort of, see a huge surge, right? And adoption, people experimenting, buying, so on and so forth, right? And I think very quickly also what we saw was that as a differentiator, right? And as a mechanics of trust, something that you also alluded to in one of your points, right? The trust is extremely critical, right? And I understand trust is critical, especially, India is still a very, very fragmented market, right? I think you have to really sort of create that. And effort, right, to create trust, a lot of edtech brands, right, brought in very fancy ambassadors, right, brand
Yeah.
ambassadors, right, to come in and talk of the value system, for example, of the delivery, so on and so forth, right. Now, right, you've been a bootstrap entrepreneur, right? You've
Yeah.
essentially built it with your own money, right? By flowing back cash flows into the business, right, and growing to the point that you are at, right?
Yes.
How difficult is it for a bootstrap entrepreneur to compete in an environment like the one we are seeing, right? It's hyper competitive, right? The kind of money which is being spent to acquire is just bizarre, right?
Yeah.
Overwhelming, right? For the
I
lack
can
of better
understand
word.
your feelings.
How difficult has that been for you to sort of keep your mind focused, right? To ensure that to continue to focus, right, and not get tempted by what's happening in the market, right? Tell me a little more about that, internal journey uh, in that environment, right? When we are reading that every second day there is a tech company getting funded, right, and a very very large valuation, right? How is that phase been for you?
Yeah, that's interesting. And in one word, if I'll say, it's very difficult.
Right,
So it's very difficult to. It's not very difficult business wise. It's very difficult mentally and emotionally. It's very
right,
difficult to control yourself with that kind of FOMO being created, and
right,
you feeling here either maybe we are being left behind, we are running out in the race, or something
right,
like that. So business does not get impacted too much, are they?
right,
Because one thing we know, and that's where probably the experience comes in. Since I spent that much time in
right,
education, we know very well that education is a very very referral and word of mouth and result oriented industry.
right,
No matter how much money you spend in marketing, it is not going to give you a lot of student until unless you are there for a while. People start noticing you, people see you year on year, people see that there are students in my town or in my circle or in my network who are associated with this brand or taken some courses this brand, and that is when they start trusting. So
right,
so unlike other industries, it is very difficult to build trust in education via
right,
marketing and branding. Okay,
right.
it creates the awareness. People know your name, but whether they will transact with you or not, it's very difficult.
Interesting.
Okay, so that is something that I personally believe and has a very good experience on. That is where, at a business level, I'm confident that there is no problem.
Right,
That no matter how much money is flowing in the market, we'll still have a good share and we'll grow consistently.
right,
But at an emotional level, at internal level, it becomes very difficult to control that.
right,
So, and at some point in time, we also tried roping in some ambassadors, some celebrity,
right,
but okay, it didn't work out at the price that we wanted.
right.
But
So
yes,
interesting.
it's very tempting, and it's very difficult to control the
But
emotion of.
how difficult is it to maintain the confidence of the team, right? Because essentially they are the ones. I mean, that's where your energy is, right? As a
Yes,
as a founder, right?
yes,
I mean, you spend a lot of time in creating a fantastic team, right? And I think that's true for you, and I think that's true for every founder, right? I mean, you create a very strong team, right? A minus one, which essentially then is working with you, right? Bringing in literally it's a 1+1, right? Eight
yes.
leading to 11, right? A huge dent in the confidence of that team happens, right, in that environment, right? How do you tackle that as a business leader? I mean, this is a more leadership question, right? This is a more management question than a business question, right? But how do you tackle that, right? Because there's constant temptation saying that, listen, there's so much happening, right? Are we going to survive? Are we not going to survive? What happens, right? They're not necessarily sure of the number. I mean, I'm saying in your position, you can possibly, with all sanity, you can dissect the situation, saying that this is working, this is not working, right? But the other people in your team, right? It just is a very difficult, pill to digest, right? What do you do in an environment like that? I mean, what did you do, for example, in an environment like
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I will say we've been fortunate enough to get a good team who has not questioned these kind of decisions, who sort of have a blind faith that, okay, what you're thinking is right. And that faith has basically come with time. The simple leadership idea here is being transparent. So we are extremely transparent with the team about what is happening, what is not happening, what are the numbers, what is the revenue, what is the sale, what is the team, what is the product. So being very transparent gives people that confidence that, okay, we are aligned and we are on the right path. And fortunately, the people who've been working for a while with us, so they know that this temporary surge of money or competition or branding is not going to disturb much us in the long run. So as long as people are aligned for the long run, people don't get disturbed. If they are there for the short term, then they start looking for these kind of things to sell or things to associate with. But that's something that we've been very fortunate with, to have a team which has that trust and which has that confidence that, okay, whatever path that we're choosing is the right path, and that is what we should continue.
Interesting. Rohit, what are the next 2 years like? Right? I'd love to answer. I'd love to question you and understand your mindset on that, right? But before I ask you that at a larger macro level, right? I would like to understand your Bharat thesis, right? I mean, my thesis is that I think Bharat has gotten exciting, right? I think every conversation that I'm having with every founder, right? In fact, even investors, right? I think Bharat is something which has become very, very interesting, right? And that's largely because, they've been consuming a lot of content, right? So, aspirationally, Bharat has very quickly gotten to a very, very tier A mindset, right? They want to, get out there, experience, right? And like you rightly highlighted, right? A lot of that is only possible through education, right? For a larger audience, right? Of course, some are going to take a very different creative path, right? Into doing what they would want to. But a large part of this audience will take a path of education, right? To essentially, to achieve what they aspire to, right? How are you looking at Bharat, right? It's getting, like I said, it's getting very, very exciting, right? Aspirationally. The good part is there are a lot of fintechs that have come in, right? EdTech is something which is now, like I said, right? There's a very, very interesting intersection between EdTech and fintech, right? Which has come in, right? Which would essentially empower their aspirations, right? But how are you looking at Bharat, right? I mean, how are you dissecting Bharat, right? How large is that going to be proportionally, right? Like, I mean, you alluded to it, saying that everything is balanced, right, between a tier A and a tier B. But going forward, right, how do you anticipate this to play out, right? Is there going to be a larger skew in terms of Bharat, right? Like I said, right, there is aspiration, there is awareness, right, a larger awareness which is there. What's your sense of it?
Yes, so that the Bharat is the big market, obviously, in India. You can't ignore that market, but we don't differentiate it much. So there may be two kind of differentiation. One is your language, and second is your paying capacity.
Right.
Okay. So now when we say Bharat, we talk about the people who primarily do not speak English and has a lower paying capacity.
Right.
Okay. Now, as far as the lower paying capacity is concerned in education, actually, there is nothing like that. Mm-hmm. That's what our belief is, and that's where we see that if you are giving the right value for money, people will pay for it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because they can figure out that capacity and they can find out the source of that money. They know how to source it and how to fund it.
Right.
Okay. Now, when it comes to the language, that is where the language is one of the major part of scaling in India. So you can't offer only things in English. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, you have to start offering a lot of things in other languages also. Okay, but so far there has not been much traction or much growth on that because most of the higher education is in English.
Right.
Okay, so you might, until unless that paradigm does not change in India, because most of the good colleges, most of the good universities, most of the good programs in skill development or in job is all in English. Mm-hmm. So eventually, the guy who is currently classified as Bharat, his aspiration is not Bharat. His aspiration is India.
Right.
Okay. So he will spend in education for the aspiration of India, not for aspiration of Bharat.
Interesting. Okay.
Until unless the aspiration does not change to Bharat. Okay, because a guy might be living in a town today, currently does not speak English very well, has a very complete vernacular education, but does he wants to stay in that only throughout his life?
Right.
No. So that is where we see that until unless the overall ecosystem is not shifting towards that, until unless our universities, our colleges, our job environment are high-paying jobs. All of them do not convert into a local language or a
Right.
Hindi language. There is no aspiration of Bharat.
Right.
Okay,
Interesting.
so our thesis, our take on that is that there is a population, there's a good
Right.
population out there, but they don't want to be called Bharat. They all want to be called India.
Right. Interesting. Interesting. I like the way you cut it. Right. I think. No, but I think there are many nuances to it, right? I would love to dig you further, Rohit, but I think I'm going to reserve that for our next conversation, and hopefully very soon we're going to have that conversation. Uh, Rohit, what are the next 2 years like, right? I mean, I would have loved to ask you a 5-year question, but unfortunately, I think we're in very dynamic times. Right? I think nothing. I think it's just too long an ask, right? A 5-year ask, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what are the next 2 years like, right? For you, Faber, right? What are the next 2 years like?
So next 2 years are going to be very, very, very challenging, and obviously crossing a lot of new milestones and taking a lot of old records for ourselves.
Right.
So one of the major milestones and targets that we will look forward to is a teacher community that we have. So the one next milestone that we are looking for is having about 10,000 teachers working with us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that is one milestone that we want to cover in next 2 years, and that is what enables us to get more students. So today, fortunately, we have less teacher and more students.
Right.
Okay, so we are always in a jugglery to figure out that how do we get more teachers to give to these students. So we have students enrolling for a 15 days, 1 month in advance, and we're telling them, okay, we will start your course after 30 days because the teacher will get free by that time.
Right.
So touch wood, but it's a very good scenario that we are in, and that's where we want to spend a lot of our energy in next couple of quarters to
Right.
create a supply which can cater to a much bigger user base or a student base.
Right.
So that is where we see a lot of energy going on to increase our supply side.
Mm-hmm.
And as the supply side increases, then we know that the demand is there, aggregating demand, pulling in the demand, and get supplying them is an easier part of the problem. And there we can have a lot of new records coming up. Some students, number of students per month, number of students per quarter.
Mm-hmm.
One of the major milestones that we will cover in this year is about 100,000 students in a year.
Right.
So that will again be a big milestone for us.
Very interesting. Rohit, my last question, right? I mean, you've been a bootstrap entrepreneur, right? I mean, you've been an entrepreneur for a very long time, right? And you've chosen to be a bootstrap entrepreneur, right? And like I said, I mean, it's an extremely difficult path to walk, right? Something you also sort of mentioned in one of your points, right? That it's scary, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you have an environment where a lot of your competitors are getting funded, right? At least for a moment, right? If not in a longer this thing, right? But at least for a moment, it gets scary, right? But it's also amazing in the sense that you have the independence of doing what you want to do, right? You can prioritize in many ways, right? You're not necessarily answerable to stakeholders at large, right? I mean, certain people will agree with that, certain people will not necessarily agree with that. But I think it has to be the founder's call, right? I've had the opportunity of knowing many founders who built exceptional businesses, right? And essentially all bootstrapped, right? It's a 5 people team, 10 people team, 15 people team. And I think the profitability that they've been able to sort of generate per employee has been absolutely phenomenal, exceptional, right? And today they have a very different kind of a freedom, right? They're not, like I said, under any pressure of anybody. The business is taking the kind of path that it is, right? They are prioritizing family, they're prioritizing life, right? And between many people today, that's actually become a way to build a business, right? To kind of bring in that financial independence, right? If you were to give an advice to people to go bootstrap, right? What are some of the key points that you think are extremely important to consider in that journey, right? And that could possibly help them build a strong, sustainable business, right? And can give them that financial independence, right? I would love you to talk a little about that.
Great, thanks a lot. So before I give advice on that, I'll tell you a reason why we have not raised funding so far and have not been on that path. It's not that we don't want to raise funding throughout our life or throughout our business path, but based on my previous experiences and people around me who have raised money and then did not work well with them. So we saw that the objective of the business should not be raising money.
Right.
Objective of business to do business, to make money,
Right.
to be profitable, and to grow,
Interesting.
and to have people working along with you grow.
Right.
Okay, and create an ecosystem for your employees, your customers, your partners, your vendors, and everybody. But
Right.
unfortunately, funding is such a glamorous thing that everything get polarized to that.
Right.
And the purpose of business becomes that okay, if I raise one round, then my purpose is to raise next round, then the purpose is to next following round.
Right.
And in that path, though it helps you get access to the capital, but it also sort of gives you a lot of disturbances.
Right.
Okay, it puts you it puts you on targets which sometimes are unrealistic, and
Right.
then puts a toll on you plus your team plus everybody else in the market.
Right.
So there are obviously pros and cons of the funding that we all know. But one thing that I learned very well is that the purpose of the business is not to raise funding.
Right.
It's other way around. The purpose of the
Right.
funding is to make business.
Right. Right.
So that is being a Marwari family and a business family. That is something that we know that you can't do business with loss.
Right.
Okay. So and till the time you're not making loss, nobody wants to fund you.
Right.
Okay. So because funding will be there only when there is loss.
Right.
So that is why we chose this path that, okay, we will grow profitably. It might take a while, and we will raise funding at the right point of time when there is a good ROI of the funding. I mean, the
Right.
funding adds you on growth. It does not become a survival point. Today, a
Interesting.
lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of companies raise money because they are not able to survive without funding.
Right.
Okay, but one of the good companies that today have seen were bootstrap and then raise funding at a much larger stage are the ones who were able to use that funding much more wisely. Okay, so that is where we see that if the funding is used for growth and not for survival, then it is the right use.
Right.
Now, coming back to your question, the advice to people who wants to grow bootstrap and who wants to grow profitably is simple, that you have to have a business model which generates money.
Right.
Okay. If your business does not generate money at a transaction level, then you can't grow it bootstrap.
Right.
Okay. Then you have to have funding coming in, and then you have to have that money getting recovered through future cash flows and future income. So
Right.
as long as you have a profitable model of business, I mean, you are making money at each transaction, then you can grow profitably. Then you're not dependent on money. That is something that people in a lot of tech businesses and a lot of businesses, a lot of time it is not possible. Like if you're making a dating app, it can't be profitable. You can't make transactions initially.
Right.
So you have to go for funding. Somebody else has to fund your expenses account.
Right.
But fortunately, we are into a business where transactions are profitable. You have a very good gross margins. You have good profitability. So at that point of time, why run in losses? Why make loss at a transaction level? If I'm not making losses at a transaction level, you can easily grow profitably.
Right. But Rohit, have you enjoyed the part or not? Right. I mean that you've had the luxury of building it the way you want to. Right. It's a version of you. And I think
Yes.
any business is a version of you. Right. I mean, if you're not, for example, you're not building it for somebody else, right? You just essentially somebody else is riding that wave with you, right?
Yes.
You still want that independence, right?
Yes.
So what
that obviously
would be the
that
advice?
enjoyment, that freedom. I mean, it's your baby, so you enjoy a lot building it, and you see it grow. That's the most satisfying thing you have in life when you create something and you see that thing growing.
Right.
There's nothing better than that.
So what will that advice be, Rohit? Advice for founders, right? Who are building it bootstrap, right? And like I said, right, it gets lonely, right? It's always good to hear a word from another founder, who's been through the curve, right? Who's built it by his own hands, right? What will that advice be?
So advice for not getting distracted.
Interesting.
So the advice would be that you have to have the faith in yourself. So it's the self-confidence. See, I have seen one theory that I keep giving to my other colleagues and batchmates and other people is that the only reason any company gets shut down is that the founder has lost interest in that. It is not the money because of which the company company gets into a shutdown. It is only your interest, your individual interest of running it further. So if you are confident in yourself, if you are looking for a long-term picture, okay, then you will have that confidence that to run it yourself. You will not be dependent on somebody else. You will not be dependent on funding for that. And you will get that intellect to know that what is the right time for me to raise. It may not be the right time, might be the time where the sector is booming and everybody is raising, you also raise, but it has to come at the right terms. So my advice would be very simple, that you have to have the confidence in yourself. A lot of time funding is an outcome of your own confidence.
Right. Interesting.
If you are not confident in yourself, then you are basically holding a lot of money to get that confidence.
Right. Interesting. I like it. I like the way you Rohit, the way you put it, Rohit. Rohit, it was a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much. I mean, how I want this conversation to go on, right? I mean, I honestly, I enjoy my conversations with founders who are working in a very resource constrained environment, and not in a wrong way, right? Because your ability to think is just so much more sharp, right? Because you
Yes.
constantly are in a zone where you have to prioritize it, right? I mean,
Yes.
there is very little margin of error, right? You can't go out and commit mistakes, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't do a lot of those things. And how I wish that many founders actually come up, right? Who bootstrap their way, and have customers' money, right? Build their enterprises, grow their enterprises, right? Because that's the most sustained and relevant way to build a business. It was a pleasure to have you, Rohit. Right?
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Pleasure is same.